Why play BoomBot? Well, you have a strong reroll spot for one of the reroll lines that are associated with BoomBot. You want to play a high cap fast 9 board because fast 9 into BoomBot with Urgot carry is a very viable and strong high cap board, or you hit early copies of units that allow you to pivot into or play around the BoomBot trait, namely either early copies of Kog'maw or early copies of Urgot that allow you to play around those units. If you're considering BoomBot, however, you need to have a really good spot for reroll if you are playing the reroll lines. In my opinion, both the reroll Fiddlesticks line and the reroll Kog'maw line, you usually have to have a good spot and don't really want to find yourself forcing into those lines without some of the necessary conditions. Additionally, it's very hard to play otherwise because you really want to be playing around fast 9, playing around Urgot as your primary carry, so it's usually really difficult to do that unless you're in a high roll spot. Additionally, you can easily lose if you don't hit your upgrades. Even if you try and fast 9, it's a very expensive board that you're aiming for, or if you're playing reroll and you miss some of the upgrades, it can be very risky. Additionally, the vertical is a little bit dependent on emblem. A big stabilization point is to play around like 4 and 6 BoomBot from your mid to your late game, so playing around an emblem becomes really important, and then a comp that requires an emblem is obviously going to have risks associated with that. If you like my content, please make sure to like and subscribe. We're on our 10,000 sub goal RP giveaway. Additionally, I think this is the last how to play certain trait guide for the set. It took me a little bit. I was trying to postponing BoomBot for a little bit to see how it shook up towards the end of the set, because it was always a little bit of an awkward line to play. But this also concludes basically the how to play series. I think we went over everything. If I missed something or you want a redo of something, let me know as well in the comments. So, what is BoomBot? BoomBots. Basically, they fire a missile every 400 damage dealt at a nearby enemy that deals magic damage. So they do this extra instance of magic damage, as usually by a nearby enemy, which also works really nicely to sometimes snipe or hit backline units. When you're playing around BoomBot, note that the damage taken can also contribute, so your frontline tanks being extremely tanky is also going to help with your BoomBot damage output. When you think about BoomBot, there is 2, 4, and 6 BoomBot, 6 requiring an emblem because there are only 5 BoomBot units to look at. So just keep that in mind. 6 BoomBot is generally considered to be really strong. It got nerfed at one point, so it's not super strong, which we'll talk about, like when to play 6 versus 4 versus 2 BoomBot and how important BoomBot is as a trait within different comps. So we'll cover that in the course of this video when we talk about some of the final boards. So when you think about BoomBot, when do you want to play BoomBot? A lot of times you're playing around early game items that work out really nicely around your Kog'maw that can later move into Urgot items if you're trying to play it in a very flexible way. Obviously, if you're playing reroll lines like either reroll Kog'maw or reroll Fiddlesticks, you want the necessary items and conditions for those units. But typically, items that work well on both Kog'maw and Urgot are going to work really nicely because you can use the Kog'maw as an item holder and then eventually pivot into your final board with Urgot on your level 9. So something like Kraken's Fury is really good on both those units. Gwinsu, more of a Kog'maw item, but it is possible to put on Urgot, just not super great. And then something else that I put here, regardless of what you're playing in a BoomBot line, if you're playing around BoomBots, Void Staff and Shredding also works really well. Why is that? Because if you read the BoomBot trait, the BoomBot trait damage that it does is magic damage, whether it's 2, 4, or 6 BoomBot. So a lot of times you can optimize the BoomBot damage, especially if you're playing into those deep BoomBot lines, 4 and 6 BoomBot, by doing extra magic resist shredding, so reducing their magic resist so that the BoomBot damage will be more effective. So something like a Void Staff is actually really strong in a lot of these lines, or something like a Spark in some cases could also be really strong. So keep that in mind when you're playing around the BoomBot trait. It's an interesting little nuance that you can do. Additionally, BoomBot emblem obviously makes the BoomBot trait a lot better. It allows you to hit some earlier breakpoints and get a lot of extra damage online a lot earlier. And 6 BoomBot is actually very stable at a high level, so that can also work really well in your favor. Additionally, different augments can work really well. Here I put high-end shopping and level up. These are typically associated with like your fast 9 or play around 5 cost style of boards. If we're thinking about BoomBot without the specific reroll lines around BoomBot units, and we're thinking about just playing it as a vertical trait, typically it's more associated with like a high cap fast 9 board. It's typically considered to be one of the highest cap boards in the game. Mind you, it's very expensive and very hard to hit, so that's why I put these augments. There's also some related BoomBot augments that can work out really well. Obviously, getting a BoomBot emblem or something I believe is called Hunter Killer Missile, and then it fires extra damage with the BoomBot trait, so that can work out pretty effectively as well. So now let's talk about some final boards. Before we do so, we're going to introduce and talk about the BoomBot units themselves. Just to give like a brief overview, I know it's towards the end of the set, but some people start a bit later, so you know, bear with me. But basically we have Kog'maw. Kog'maw is mainly an auto attacker that does physical AD, so he's just going to want to attack as much as possible, and he synergizes also with the rapid fire trait. You have Skarner, who is a BoomBot Vanguard unit that does a large amount of damage and also has really good shielding effects, so you can actually give him some extra armor, and then he can do a good amount of magic damage while additionally having a lot of tankiness because of the Vanguard trait. We have Fiddlesticks. Fiddlesticks basically does like this thing where he just like sucks multiple people. He does like this magic damage that's split between and does kind of like damage over time. Fiddlesticks also has built-in shred, which works really well with the BoomBot trait. If you're ever playing around BoomBot and you're looking to get some extra shred and you're playing more of the AD units, the extra shred can usually help your BoomBots do more damage via the BoomBot trait. And in general, Fiddlesticks is a great unit to just have in general with many lines for applying that 20% shred that can help you with your itemizations a little bit. Next we have Cho'Gath. Cho'Gath recently buffed, but that's just important to know. But Cho'Gath is basically BoomBot Bruiser, and he is very, very tanky in the sense that he just kind of like sits there and continues to gain HP. So if you have some sort of HP recovery or percentage HP recovery, this unit could be very hard to tackle, especially with certain Ord artifacts or like an Anima Visage or things like that. So just keep that in mind. But usually with Cho'Gath, you're just trying to have him just be a nuisance and live as long as possible, continue to gain that max health, and to a point where he's just too hard for DPS to kind of get through, is the idea with him. And then we have Urgot. Urgot is an incredible unit. He's one of the best 5 costs in the game. So Urgot just does an insane amount of damage. He has an execute built in. That's not just to say like he's executioner, which is his trait, just allows him to crit, but he also has an execute built in where he could kill an enemy that he's locked onto, and it will basically kill them at a certain percentage health. So he's really good at finishing off units and not allowing them to just like go infinite and live forever. Additionally, he also gives loot. When he kills them, he grinds them up, and you can also get extra gold as well as extra components, and the extra components can help you to cap really high because the components can turn into items, and having a bunch of items on other units starts to identify or make other threats on your board. So that's something really important to look at. Now, we're going to talk about the different lines. The main lines that we usually would think about is either Kog'Maw reroll, Fiddlesticks reroll, or Urgot carry fast 9 style of comp. Of the 3, I think Fiddlesticks is the one that is the weakest, so we're just going to start with this one first. Fiddlesticks reroll, basically what you play it with is Bruiser. You basically you often just play 6 Bruiser to make like this impenetrable wall of a front line, and then Fiddlesticks works in like the second row or like a little bit backlined. Just to do some extra damage, and basically what you're doing, you're trying to stall out for this Fiddlesticks to ramp up and just slowly delete all the units on the board. With this comp, I would say it's a little bit temperamental, and I'll explain why for a couple reasons. But typically when you're looking at your Fiddlesticks items, you want to just slam Archangels on him. A lot of times it's like double Archangel is considered really good on him, and then there's some other item that's going to be your conditional thing that's going to make this comp playable, in my opinion. So I'm going to pop open another Fiddlesticks over here, and then basically in your front line, you're playing the 6 Bruiser. Your Cho'Gath is going to be your main tank, and a lot of times because you're rerolling for a 3 cost, you're usually rerolling on level 7, you typically go for Gragas 3 and Mordekaiser 3. So this comp got a huge nerf, and I talked about it a lot in a lot of the other videos, so I don't want to dwell too much on it. But this comp used to be like kind of okay, but one of the big nerfs that this comp hit was when they changed Redemption to Anima Visage. So before this item that was made, Tear and Belt, it used to be an item that would heal multiple units, like it would heal yourself as well as adjacent units. So it's very effective on playing Bruisers where all the units have a bunch of HP. You would recover percentage health on multiple units, which would help this board sustain itself a lot better. Now it only recovers the HP on one of the units, which actually makes it a lot worse in this comp. So that's why, makes the comp a lot worse in general. So just keep that in mind. That's why my opinion of it has changed dramatically, in the fact where I say be very careful playing around this comp, because if you're not considering that change, it is a big change, and it has been reflected a lot in stats of this comp just falling off dramatically once that item change has happened. Now, the main ways that you play this particular version of BoomBot, or this particular comp, is with some sort of win condition or some sort of enabler. Typically, the enablers that you look for are either Bruiser Emblem, which you can put on the Fiddlesticks. Bruiser Emblem just helps you to stabilize and cap a lot higher. It also works really well with Fiddlesticks because the Bruiser Emblem, when you reroll, he'll gain a bunch of max health. And it also does additional bonus magic damage, works really well with his ability to like hit the backline and make use of it as well. So Bruiser Emblem on him not only works as a good damage item, but it also works to help make the board cap higher in that you can fit in more units, and also gives him a little bit of survivability. If you don't have Bruiser Emblem, the other things are artifact anvils that make this really reliable. Typically Sniper's Focus and Blinding Jewels is the ones that you look for. I'm trying to find Blinding Jewel. So the way Fiddlesticks does damage actually works with Blinding Jewel. He does damage over time, so when it says like do this much damage split between them, it applies it over amount of time, so it works as like a damage tick effect. So each of those ticks works to heighten the damage of Blinding Jewel. So that's very important. Additionally, if you have Blinding Jewel, it also works with the Bruiser Emblem, because the Bruiser Emblem damage instances also apply with that. So you know, Blinding Jewel and Bruiser Emblem is like a giga combination, but like I said, that's extremely high roll and extremely specific. And then Sniper's Focus works exceptionally well because it allows Fiddlesticks to be placed a little bit further back, and additionally, because Fiddlesticks hits multiple units, like the 3 closest enemies, he has like a very sniping, powerful effect, and with his base AP that you ramp up with the Archangels, it can work really well with Sniper's Focus, where you just delete the units. In terms of like a tier of like how important I think they are, if you're looking for any one particular scenario, I think the easiest way to make this work is with Sniper's Focus, or it just works really nicely. Double Archangel Snipers is extremely powerful. Bruiser Emblem could also work really well, and Blinding Jewel can also work really well, but typically you want Blinding and Bruiser, or if you have just one of them, the comp could be a little bit weaker. If you're looking for just one of these things, this is pretty good. Additionally, other artifacts can work as well, because obviously you can pick tank ones for the Cho'Gath. One that works really well on Cho'Gath is Innervating Locket. Innervating Locket basically recovers 20% of the holder's max health with every cast, and additionally, when you get hit, you recover mana. So with Cho'Gath, where his main effect is that when he casts, he gains max health. Basically, this Cho'Gath just continues to ramp up health and then continues to recover a huge chunk of health with that 20% max health to a point where he's almost unkillable. So these are obviously conditions. This is very artifact heavy. Or very situational, so maybe like a loot sub game or like a specific cash out. But even in these cases, I would say it's very risky. Mordekaiser is very hard to find, so you often don't have the Mordekaiser 3, which can hurt your front line. Gragas is very popular, so you often don't have the Gragas 3, and then it could be a little bit of a mess going forward. So be very careful, right? You can still play this comp, it can still work out very nicely for you. I just always err on the side of caution. I don't want like a beginner player to hard force this and then go 8th and then come back to me and say, oh, I went bot 4 with it, I don't know what happened. It's like, no, the comp itself is a little bit hard to get to work. Additionally, when you push levels, this is why Bruiser Emblem also helps out quite a bit. Getting to 4 BoomBot is a good power spike, and then you can cap out around an Urgot too. So you can just play some extra BoomBots and kind of get that BoomBot synergy active to work here. The other comp that's a little bit more common is the Kog'maw reroll line. I think this line was very strong last patch, but it did get some nerfs going into this patch, so I would err on the side of caution with this as well. Make sure that you're playing it from a good spot where you can hit the units pretty effectively. But typically what you're going for is Kog'maw 3-star and Vi 3-star. Afterwards, you can also try and go for Skarner 3-star. I think the lowest priority would be the Kindred 3-star, because I find that she just doesn't do that much no matter what. So usually you're just aiming for Vi Kog'Maw and then trying to push levels to make sure you have the 6th Vanguard in. Additionally, this comp could work really well with Starry Night. It also plays multiple 1-cost, so it can work well with like 1-for-all and some of those 1-cost related buffing augments that can actually help you to get more HP and get more damage online. When you think about Kog'Maw, he's mostly an auto attacker, and he also has empowered autos that basically does extra bonus physical damage. So he works really well with Guinsoo, obviously. That's just an item that helps you to gain a bunch of attack speed to get those auto attacks off. And then you also can put a Krakens. So Krakens works really well on him, and I think these 2 items are a must if you're playing around Kog'Maw reroll. Every auto attack that you do, Krakens is going to ramp up your attack damage. So it works really effectively to just have this Kog'Maw ramp up with this really hard front line to crack, which is the 6th Vanguard front line. Additionally, as your last item, you have many options. Things that give you some damage amp as well as some extra stats can work out really nicely. A Striker's Flail can work out really well. Additionally, a Giant Slayer can work out really well. And of course, you can just go for a second's Krakens if you have such a high roll spot to just like ramp up that AD as much as possible. But the last item is pretty flexible. You just have to make sure that you have the Gwinsu Krakens, and then last item, just try and find something that synergizes with your kit and synergizes with your augments to get the most out of the comp. Additionally, we have Vi. Vi is a really tanky unit. She did get nerfed a little bit. That's why I say this line is a little bit awkward. Now, she didn't get nerfed as at a 3-star level, so the comp will still be relatively the same power level if you hit everything. That's why I say play it from a good spot. But Vi 1 and Vi 2 did get nerfs, and she was pretty overtuned, so that makes sense. So be careful, because your journey up until you hit your full board is going to be a little bit more rough on this patch, which is 14.7. I just want to air that out. I just want to warn you guys. And then 6 Vanguard also got a little bit of a nerf, so in general, you know, your taste of the comp might be a little bit more sour if things don't work out perfectly. Either way, Vi is really flexible on her items. A lot of times you're just building her like with really good tank items, so you know, obviously your armor and your MR is going to go a long way, your HP is going to go a long way. It works really well with Vanguard, so a lot of times you can just go for like Giga Tank if possible, and just make sure that she like absolutely like tanks as much as she can. So that's like, you know, your max armor, max MR, max HP. But she also has some really good synergies with some other items, because she scales really well with AD in addition to her other stuff. She can also do a lot of damage and be like an extra carry. Sterix also works really well on her. Gives her a really good health shield, gives her HP. So Sterix is often an item that if you have extra components that kind of work out that way, you can put it on the Vi. Additionally, this comp as well works really well with Ornn artifacts. So this is another situation where if you see Ornn artifacts, you can often take it. Something like Unending Despair works really well on the Vanguard units, and especially units that gain extra shields like Vi, because she just procs it a lot and can do a lot of extra damage that way. Additionally, the tank ones are all really good. We have lots of auto attacking ones that work really well, like Wit's End, that can synergize really well with the Kog'maw. And additionally, like even a trench coat on Vi I've seen do really well in certain cases. But typically the other one for Kog'maw is the Flicker Blade. Obviously, Flicker Blade, just every auto attack that you do, you gain stacking damage, and you also gain stacking attack speed. So it's obviously going to synergize extremely well with this kit. If you see Flicker Blade, this is a really good line to go for amongst other, like, you know, attack speed loving units that you would have. This comp could also spike really hard with either a Vanguard emblem or a BoomBot emblem, because then it just allows you to play around for BoomBot into your late game. Right, you can just play 4 BoomBot pretty easily and cap out your damage really high, but obviously that would require you having an emblem, so just keep that in mind. Or you'd have to be like really high level of some sort, maybe drop the Kindred in some cases. So just keep those in mind. Additionally, in some cases, I think if your augments or your Kog'maw items aren't particularly great, you could also pivot into Urgot late game if you're able to tempo and hit really aggressively, because I think like an Urgot 2 sometimes can out DPS the Kog'maw 3 even in a setup like this. So just keep that in mind. If you have like, you know, a high level and you have an Urgot 2 and you notice that he's doing really good damage, you could put like the Krakens on Urgot, because a really good Urgot item as well, and rearrange your items a lit to even out that damage, because Urgot is quite powerful even without executioner synergy invested into him. Now we're going to talk about the last variation, which is the one that you're going to find most often. Obviously, these other two are ones that, or not most often, I would say, but these ones are obviously conditional on you playing around the reroll line or the reroll spot to play the BoomBot units. However, there are these lines where you play towards a fast 9 style of board. Now, I say it's a fast 9 style of board. You could fit in boards on level 8, obviously, but typically what you're trying to do is make it to level 9 to play around Urgot. So you want to be really far ahead. You can actually play this line a lot of times like from a really good Kog'maw opener. If you don't think that you can reroll the unit, maybe you're contested, you can often push levels because Kog'maw 2 is pretty strong early game. Vi 2 used to be really strong early game, so I'm not sure exactly how that's going to work out anymore, but typically, like, you know, if you have really high tempo or if you're really strong, then you can play around Urgot instead. When you play around Urgot, typically you end up playing something that looks a little bit like this. There are many different variations, but the way that you should always think about the comp around Urgot is you're basically just playing 5-cost soup. You're trying to play as many 5 costs as possible, throw them in the pot, and then boom, you have all your 5 costs, and you win off of just your board being so high quality with so many expensive units. That's why I say it's more of a fast 9 style of comp. So with Urgot, your items typically, Kraken's really good on him. A lot of people put Kraken's Gwinsu on the Urgot. I don't think Gwinsu is that good on Urgot. He likes attack speed, but just doesn't like sync up really well with his kit. So it's kind of like, you know, it's like good, but it's not great. So like you'll hear a lot of people say like, I don't really want to put Gwinsu on Urgot. But a lot of times if you're playing around those item combos, it's still okay to put on him. What I would recommend more so is just making items that give base attack speed, but also scale his damage up pretty significantly. So something like a Striker's Flail works really well. You get the extra damage amp, and you also get the crit, which works well with his kit if you're activating Executioner. Additionally, you can also put Deathblade. Just having base stats is going to help ramp him up a lot better and have him do some more upfront damage before the Krakens kind of starts to ramp up. You can also make more Krakens, but in general, Urgot, very flexible items. You can even play Giant Slayers on him. Just try and scale him in a meaningful way. Try and put items that make sense. I've even seen QSS in some cases work well, but usually that's like a bad luck protection type of build. But that's also good. But usually you're going for at least one Krakens, and then the other items can kind of fall into place, because a lot of times when you're fast 9ing, you're usually playing items from tempo anyways, so your item slams are not going to be like perfect in that case. Additionally, what you're trying to go for is Garen spreading around BoomBot for everybody. Garen spreading around BoomBot is going to be really powerful, especially if you activate into a higher tier of BoomBot, and then you're basically just trying to 2-star all of your 5 costs in order to cap out the board really high. So this is a board, obviously I'm just showing 8 units here. Obviously, if you make it to a higher level, you could just play with more of the units there. Like more of the 5 costs and less of the other units, and you just want to just like I said, 5 cost soup. So a lot of times you'll end up with a board that looks more like this. Basically you're just going to be playing 4 Bruiser, 2 BoomBot. You can drop the BoomBot because it's not super important to play 4. If you're playing some garbage units, they're not going to help your damage out that much. What's going to help your damage out a lot more is having a much more stable front line around this Cho'Gath, which can work out really effectively, and playing extra 5 costs, which are going to help your board become extremely potent, extremely powerful. If you have a BoomBot emblem, however, this is a bruiser variation. You could play it without all the bruisers. You can drop down your bruisers. Here it's just as 3 bruiser. Don't worry, it's just not super aesthetic. But if you have a BoomBot emblem, then a 4 BoomBot line like this works out really well. Basically, just swap out one of the bruisers for the Fiddlesticks. You get activated Techie, which helps out your board because Techie just reduces the damage output of your opponent. And then you can also put the BoomBot emblem on whoever you want. And usually this is the quote-unquote high cap board, or one of the highest cap boards in the game. This board or this variation if you hit the bruisers, or a variation like this, which is totally fine. All of these variations kind of work, but they all require you to play multiple 5 costs, which is why they are extremely high cap boards. Urgot is already a really strong unit and can cap boards extremely high and do an absolute massive amount of damage. Combine that with playing a bunch of 5 costs, this is like the quote-unquote Bill Gates comp, right? You just play all the 5 costs and you win the game for free because the 5 costs are just going to absolutely decimate everybody. Additionally, with Fiddlesticks, you also get the Shred, which can help with your itemizations, especially if you don't have perfect Shred items. On these boards, a lot of times, we're also playing Vex. It's not super important to play Vex for Executioner, but it does work out really well, so I would recommend it. And then obviously Vex items would work out as the normal Vex items, Blue Buff Gunblade, if you have such items. You can play around these boards. This is a board you can also play if you're playing around Vex and you're trying to look for a high cap board. If you have like an infinite amount of gold because you're win streaking, you're doing well in the game, you can pivot into a board like this where you just play as many 5 costs as possible. Additionally, if you're playing around BoomBot and you have a BoomBot emblem, you might ask yourself, why isn't it play 6 BoomBot? Why is it play 4 BoomBot? The real answer is, if you have the upgraded 5 costs, more of the 5 costs are just going to be better. You're better off just playing around like Viego to Kabuko to Garen to than it is to play some of the useless BoomBot units, because basically you're going to be having to force to play a Kog'Maw on your board, which isn't particularly great, and a Skarner, which both of them without synergies are going to be pretty lackluster, and the 5 costs will make up for the 6 BoomBot damage that you would receive. However, something that's really important is that these units are cheap. So if you're going for a quick fast 9 board, then you can just drop whatever 5 costs you didn't hit. So for example, a lot of times you don't hit these ones, maybe you have the Kabuko, maybe you don't hit Kabuko and you hit Viego, but yeah, you can play this board on level 9 as a fast 9 with a BoomBot emblem, and you can actually stabilize around the 6 BoomBot damage. What I would recommend is play 6 BoomBot until you hit upgraded 5 costs, and then once you have all 5 costs that you can play, swap out 2 of the shitter BoomBots, typically the Skarner and the Kog'Maw, and play the 5 costs instead. Don't play the 5 costs if they're not upgraded, because if they're not upgraded, you're better off just having the extra BoomBot damage. But if you have the upgraded 5 costs, play the upgraded 5 costs, right? Your board will be much stronger with the Viego 2 and the Zac 2, and just scaling up those units instead. Or like likewise, if you don't hit Kabuko or you hit Viego, whatever you hit, play what you hit. and try and be a little bit more flexible. Additionally, similarly, this is a board where you're playing all these 5 costs. I'm playing 3 out of 2 bruiser. You could also just play the other variations like I showed here, where you play 4 bruiser. This is a little bit more stable. Even with a BoomBot emblem, you can play a variation like this with 4 BoomBot instead, right? You can just drop, like, for example, Zac, and you can play like a Skarner and stabilize like this. It's really important to find different stabilization points and not cookie cutter this comp, because it's already going to be hard to make it to level 9, and it's going to be hard to have enough gold to hit all your units. So just try your best to go for some of these variations, right? Hold on to your bruisers, hold on to your boombots, and if you have a BoomBot emblem, then you can play one of these variations. And of course, if you don't have a BoomBot emblem, try and play one of the other variations of either all 5 costs or stabilize around like a couple extra boombots to increase your Urgot damage, and then you're ideally going to hit your Urgot 2-star and try and cap out this board pretty high. Next, let's talk about some early game. Obviously, when you're playing around BoomBot, your early game often is just like the BoomBot Vanguard opener, where you play something like this, right? You have like a Vanguard plus the Kog'maw Skarner duo. This is a very strong board that typically can help you to streak very early. It's what helps make the Kog'maw line super strong. They did nerf Vi for this reason, because Vi used to be one of the best 1 costs in the game. I think she's still really good. She didn't get that big of a nerf, so don't sweat it. But this was like a really strong and reliable front line that you can usually play around, with a really reliable and strong back line that would do a lot of damage early game. This is a type of board that you can easily streak, and a lot of times you're playing this board into any of the AD comps, right? You can usually play it into Aphelios, Zeri, or in really high roll cases, you can play around Urgot. Something that's really important to notice is that when you're playing around this, you have flexible options. If you hit the Urgot, no matter what, you could use that to stabilize yourself really effectively on level 8 as well, if you're not playing around the reroll lines. So even if you're trying to play a board like this, let's say you're playing this and you're trying to play into like Vanguard Marksman, for example, right? So a lot of times, you might see like, going for Aphelios, going for Xayah, especially if you're contested. If you just find an Urgot randomly, obviously this isn't a reroll variation, I'm just saying, like, if you're just playing like Vanguard Marksman out of nowhere, if you find an Urgot early, you can actually play around the Urgot. You can also pivot this comp late game into an Urgot 2, which I think is a lot better than Aphelios 2 in a lot of end games. So you have many options to pivot into this comp. A lot of it just requires having an incredible excess amount of gold, and obviously being incredibly high roll by either hitting the Urgot early or having like a really good spot where you can make it to level 9 and have a lot of gold to roll for those extra 5 costs. But like I said, you have lots of options and you have lots of pivot options. So this opener has become one of the better openers, where you have a lot of different things you can play towards. You can play towards your Exotech if you have good Exotech items, play towards Vanguard Marksman if you have Vanguard Marksman, and then obviously in this case, when we're talking about BoomBot, you can also play around BoomBot. Additionally, if you were originally planning to play around Urgot and things aren't going particularly well for you, you can also use that to play the other way, right? If you're playing BoomBot and you don't hit Urgot, you can play around these other units instead, stabilize your board, and then figure out or play for top 4. So you do have pivot options, because the item combinations actually work on multiple units by nature of them just like making these units relevant and, having them be relevant in the current landscape of the game. So what are your conditions for success? Obviously, if you're playing reroll, I don't really talk too much about Fiddlesticks. Like I said, I think of the options, Fiddlesticks is a little bit awkward, especially in recent history. I think you could do really well with Fiddlesticks, so keep that in mind. Like, obviously the slides just add Fiddlesticks with Fiddlesticks win conditions that I talked about to the mix. But like I said, you really want to have a good Kog'maw spot if you're playing around Kog'maw. Otherwise, you want to be extremely high roll. The board is extremely expensive, right? If you're playing around multiple 5 costs, each of these 5 costs costs 15 gold, right? 15, 15, 15. This is 60 gold just to buy the units. So if you make it to level 9 and you have 50 gold to roll, you don't even have enough gold to upgrade all of the units. Do you see what I'm trying to get at? You need a huge amount of gold, or you need a really good spot. So usually these are boards that will cap extremely high, and obviously will be one of the strongest comps in the game, because obviously we're playing like all the 5 costs. Of course it's going to be broken. It's going to be strong as shit. Like, no kidding, it's going to be insanely strong. But it's just to take note, it's a very expensive board. The gold investment is massive, so you can't really angle towards this style of comp unless you have a good spot, because the chances are you'll make it to level 9, you won't have any gold to buy anything, and then you'll just die instantly anyways, right? Unless you have a really high roll spot, then you can make it to level 9, you can sit on level 9 for a while. Even if you lose a fight, you can then try and find the time to upgrade the units, remake your econ, fix up everything, and then cap really high and then just beat everybody in the lobby because nobody will be able to handle this many upgraded 5 costs. That's kind of like the idea with BoomBot, typically speaking, right? Streak early, be strong early, and then make it to a really good spot late game. So you always want to make sure that you have econ and HP, and you want to make sure you can reliably fast 9 with enough econ. Obviously, BoomBot emblem can help. It does stabilize you, and it does a lot of extra damage, namely like, you know, 2 BoomBot with like the Kog'maw early game is one of the best openers in the game, in my opinion. It's just really strong, really reliable, just does a lot of damage. If you can find like early upgrades and you can find like a BoomBot emblem in your 4 or 6 BoomBot really early, you can usually make it really late game with like a lot of extra resources. Additionally, finding an Urgot early is going to be insane, because if you can start getting extra loot drops from the Urgot, you're just going to slowly steamroll and outcap everybody, because you're going to have items for everybody. So like I said before, be careful. You need to have a good spot, obviously. So just make sure that you have that good spot to actually realize the full potential of this board. Thanks for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe. It does help me out as a smaller TFT content creator, and we're working on a 10,000 sub goal, so that would help out a lot. Hopefully you enjoyed this part and the series. Most of the videos, I think maybe I missed 1 or 2, but I put them in a playlist as well, and like the how to play for set 14. Of course, it's towards the end of the set, so I'm sure if you guys watched it, you already have seen it. But just keep in mind that, you know, I'll be doing the same thing next set as well. So just, you know, it's all good, and it's all good. Thanks for watching. Have a great day, and see ya. Bye-bye.